Welcome to Therapy Unplugged, the podcast where two therapists offer insights to the real-life issues we all experience. We are your hosts, Sarah Benoit and Meaghan McCullough. Welcome back, everyone. I hope everyone out there is doing well. Meaghan, how are you doing this morning?
I am doing great, Sarah. Just had a super Mother's Day weekend, got to spend it with family, and the sun is shining
I know,
after
it's so
how many
nice.
days of rain. So, yeah, I'm good, thanks.
Good to hear. Um, so today our topic is on accountability, and another way of it's just basically owning our own stuff. Um, and I'm excited about this. I think this is actually a very large topic.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm sure we'll do our best to do justice in the time that we have. But again, it's one of these things where people write books about this stuff.
Yeah,
So we're trying to condense a lot into a short time frame. So,
absolutely. Yeah, when you had suggested this topic, I immediately, resonated with it, I think it's something that probably we see and that comes up a lot both in therapy, right? Like
mhm,
this idea of taking accountability for one's thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and of course, in our own personal lives too, we see it. So yeah, I'm excited to tackle this topic. And I just say tackle because I agree with you. This is a big topic, right?
mhm,
But hopefully what we can do is just spark maybe some sort of, idea or interest, in, our listeners to really start to look at, take a closer look, right, to why they feel the way they feel, why they
mhm.
do what they do.
Right.
um, and because I find it to be an incredibly, um, empowering practice.
Mhm, mhm. Do you see a lot of this in your practice? In your private practice?
Yes, what I see, and I know I've said this before, it's not necessarily that clients are coming to sessions saying, "Ugh, I really need to learn how to take accountability for my own shit." They might not be saying that, but a lot of people are coming to therapy, even if they're not aware of it consciously, but subconsciously.
Mhm,
They are coming, um, into session. Really, I think a lot of them with a want, a need to take some accountability for the way things may be going in their lives.
mhm,
Um, and so kind of organically, I think that the conversation in a lot of my sessions will will go in that direction, because self-awareness for me is it's key. It's
mhm.
key. Um,
And I think you bring up a good point, which is that idea of self-awareness, because I think that's where accountability really starts. You mentioned to getting listeners to kind of maybe we plant a seed, and I think it's about, looking at so basically, and let me maybe back up a step where what is exactly accountability?
mhm.
And it's really when we take responsibility for our own actions. And, you mentioned too, um, taking responsibility for our thoughts, our feelings. I mean, it's our words. And on the flip side, it's also our inaction. It's what we don't say. It's what we don't do.
Yes.
And it's when we think about this, I mean, I think the place to start is with ourselves because if we can't be honest with ourselves, there's no way we're going to be able to be accountable outside of our being.
Well said. Well said. Yeah, and I would also add that, and this is just another way of looking at it, that accountability is connected to taking responsibility for our lives rather than giving away our power,
Mm,
blaming someone or something else for the way things are going. Right? So it's like this process of empowerment, right? Like
yes.
I am going to start to look at my own stuff and as you said, I'm going to start to become honest with myself. And in that process, that can be incredibly empowering.
And that's a really good point because I also don't want listeners to, when even thinking about probably the title of this, like, oh my gosh, accountability and owning your own shit. That doesn't have to be negative. There
Mhm.
are negative and positive consequences to everything, but I also think, and we'll get to this when we talk about, more strategies, but I want listeners to understand that there's a positive side to this. And part of that is celebrating
Mhm.
our wins, so to speak, and being proud of our accomplishments. It's not just the negative. It's not just, I mean, yes, it's a struggle and it is a process. And we are talking about our own self development. But along the way, it is giving ourselves a pat on the back and not in a, it's not about having this bravado or cockiness. It's just being real.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I completely agree. And if also, another idea that is coming up for me right now to share is, I know we've talked in previous episodes about um, this need for control, right? So a
Mhm.
lot of times I'll see this in practice or even in my own personal life, right? So there's this need to want to control our circumstances in our lives so that we feel happy, so that we feel satisfied, content, whatever the case may be. But when it comes to accountability, I personally see that a more healthy way to use this to focus on control is to focus our attention on our responses to our circumstances, responses to other people. Um, that's where we actually have control, right?
True.
Um, and this, in my opinion, is taking accountability. So, just a real quick example, we had what, like a week's worth of rain,
Mhm.
and it makes me grouchy. Like if I don't see the sun after a certain amount of time, I start to feel it. And this is obviously a silly question, but do I have any control over the rain?
Right.
None, like zero. um, but what do I have control over?
Mhm.
Do I want to feel like, a grouch for a whole week? I do not.
Right.
So what can I do instead, right? How can I take accountability for, yeah, I feel like crap right now. And now do I want to stay in this place of feeling like crap? Or do I wanna find a way to not mind the rain so much?
Mhm.
Or maybe I distract myself, right, by doing something that uplifts me in other ways. So that's just kind of like an example, I think, of at least how I'm seeing accountability.
Mhm. I think there are a lot of ways and maybe, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it, types of accountability.
Mm,
So, there's, personal accountability. Um, if you're working for someone, there's organizational accountability. So, are you doing your job? Are you saying what you say you're gonna do? There's social accountability, what are you on a broader brush, and I know this is where you thrive. It's that bigger picture,
Mm,
you know, where are you in your community? Are
mhm,
you active? Are you inactive? Are you positive? Are you negative? Are you involved? Are you on the sidelines? Um, and I think, and I won't get into this, but I mean, then there's ethical accountability,
mhm.
which I think that's for us as therapists, that's a big one.
Yes.
But I think when you look at this, then you can also, I mean, and this is for those that are more analytical in terms of like, okay, how do I break this all down? Because I think there's a lot of areas where we can be accountable. I mean, I think where you and I probably see it the most is in relationship. And, but I see it when I think of professionally and personally, I think not just in relationship, but again, for some people, it is the workplace. That's what they will
Mhm,
bring to therapy. I think for some, it's about their finances, it's about their health, it's about their spirituality. There's so many areas. And what I don't, and I say I don't know this, and not because I don't intellectually know it, but, as you were saying, people don't necessarily come into therapy and say, I need to be more accountable.
mhm,
Um, I
mhm.
don't think, and again, it's that subconscious idea of, okay, well, what are the benefits? If I'm really accountable, how am I benefiting?
Yes.
And I think it's one thing to say, yeah, it's great. Like we all need to do this. Um, okay, but why? How is this going to help me? Because some people truly believe, well, if I keep my mouth shut about X, or if I don't tell the truth about this, I might be protecting this person as an example. But
Right.
okay, but then what are you carrying?
Yep.
Because now you have a secret or you have, you know, it wasn't true. Um, so I'm curious from where you sit, Megan, when you think of accountability, by being accountable, how does this help someone? What are the
Mm.
benefits?
Yeah, I wrote down quite a few benefits
Okay.
to cultivating this practice of accountability. Um, and I'm sure you have some too. So if you want, we could just go back and forth with a
Yeah,
few.
sure.
Um, okay, let's see. Where do I want to start? I'm going to start with relationships and the benefit that taking our own individual accountability for ourselves, our thoughts, our feelings, our actions will
Mhm,
then benefit those that we're in relationship with, right? Because if I'm taking accountability, then I am working to be, for example, as honest as I can,
mhm,
right? And that would be uh, not only honest with myself, but if my friend or partner or child does something that has triggered me, right? Like I want to really look at that first within myself.
mhm,
Um, and then perhaps after I do that process of self inquiry with myself, I'll come to the conclusion that, you know, yes, this is something like let's just say, Sarah, there was something that happened between you and I, right?
mhm,
That left me feeling bad. Um, I would first go within and I would do this process of self-inquiry we've talked about and we'll probably bring up again in strategies, but about my own feelings. And then maybe after I do that, I'll determine, this is really something I want to bring up with you. And
mhm,
so how can I bring up this with you in a way that's not like finger pointing, that's not blaming, that's not just I'm going to make Sarah feel badly right now because she made me feel bad, but more coming from a place of, I'm wanting to understand, right?
mhm,
Like your perspective. So all of that would foster a rich, like, just this sounds like a weird word to use, but it's coming to me for relationships, like a high quality friendship,
mhm,
right? Because we are promoting honesty, we're promoting high levels of communication. we're learning how to resolve conflicts without blame shifting. So that to me is a huge benefit of taking accountability. Is it improves our relationships tenfold.
You're right. It does. And I think that ties into, I mean, I think you bring up, it's interesting that you chose an example between the 2 of us, because I was listening to my body as you were saying that, knowing full well right now we have no issues. And
Right, there was nothing.
and I got a pit in my stomach.
Oh, yep.
And, and knowing, okay, this is again that self-reflection piece. Okay, what is that about? There's this instant defensiveness that comes up for me. Um, and it's not you, it's not, that's just how I'm wired. And like you said, okay, taking a step back and saying, what am I experiencing? What's this about? And how do I want to handle this? I'm not going to come into a conversation with you and blast you and be like, Megan, how dare you have an issue with me?
Mhm,
Now internally, my inner child might be going, oh crap. What,
Yep, yep,
what is she going to say?
yep.
But again, like you said, I think it's being mindful, and it's, I would use the word curious. Like, how do I want
Yes,
to approach this? And I will tell you, you know, that I know when I have done this coming into a conversation, whether it's just a benign conversation, whether it's a conflict, one, it doesn't mean I'm not nervous, but I am more grounded
Mhm,
and I feel more in control, going back to that idea of control,
mhm.
because I'm like, okay, I am not reacting off the cuff. I'm coming to this with curiosity. Importantly, though, I'm respecting the fact that you are coming to this relationship from an honest perspective and you're being honest about how you feel.
Right.
And then I have a greater level of self respect for myself
Yep.
because I have that willingness to be vulnerable. I'm not shutting you down. I'm not running away. I'm saying, okay, I'm an adult. I can sit and have this conversation. And I can tell you, whether it be personal relationships, professional relationships, even especially my clients, when someone comes to me and they're honest, I have so much respect for that. When they
Yes.
come to me and say, Sarah, I really screwed up,
Mhm.
or I, thinking back, I could have done this differently. I can't change the past, but this is how I want to operate moving forward. Um, I have so much respect for that. And that to me is a huge benefit, because when you have self-respect, when you have mutual respect, you just stand on the ground is so much more solid.
Completely 100% agree. Completely agree, Sarah. And, I'll just add that, I don't know if you experience this, but I know, and again, I'd say especially with my clients, but certainly in personal life too, I don't know how many times I have heard from various people that there is this deep-seated fear of making somebody angry, or a deep-seated fear of somebody they care about being upset with them.
Yes.
And I think that this might be one of the number one reasons why we skirt accountability because, again, in this hypothetical situation, if I had an issue with you, um, it would there's it would be a very human natural response for me to be like, "Oh, that is way too uncomfortable, like, to bring
Mhm.
this up." So I'm just gonna deny it, right? I'm just gonna let it go, I'm gonna ignore it. Now, maybe in some cases that's appropriate, but not if it's something that is really staying with me, right?
Exactly.
And so taking accountability is like maybe an example of it might be, and I could even start the conversation with you this way, and maybe this will give some listeners some ideas. If you have to bring up something really uncomfortable with a partner, child, friend, whatever, and you're afraid of what the reaction is going to be, but you know it would be helpful to shine
Mhm.
the light on it, you could say something like, "Sarah, I really have something I wanna talk to you about, and it's going to be uncomfortable, but the reason why I wanna bring it up is because I really care about our friendship,
Mhm.
and I don't want us to have secrets, or I don't want to be hiding this. Are you open to having that conversation?" Something like that, right? So you can start by letting that person know, or I'm bringing this up because I do care.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And what I like about that example is you also give the other person a choice. So if they're not in a good headspace
Yep.
or ready, they have the ability, you've given them the window to say yes or no. And, and then it's also about if let's say the answer is no, then it's okay, can we have to I'd like to talk about this. When is going to be a good time?
Exactly. Right. You're absolutely, because it might not be the right moment. Um, and then I would hopefully understand and respect that. And right. And okay, could we find a time next week or whatever? So, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up too.
And I mean, part of what we're also talking about by doing these kind of things is this is good for our mental health on a lot of levels. But I think, you could be, as an example, let's say anxious. So you're anxious maybe to have this kind of open dialogue.
Mhm.
But my guess is once it's over, there's a sense of relief
Yep.
and a sense of empowerment.
Yes.
So part of what we're talking about too here is, you know, this really improves self-esteem. It improves self-confidence. You're basically showing yourself, "Oh my gosh, I can do this. And the world didn't fall apart. I'm still here. They're still here." Um, and that's why I think, the sometimes it's the easiest, but yet the hardest place to start is within ourselves, acknowledging, and
Mhm.
that's why I see this in session. Like, I give people so much credit because a lot of times when they're acknowledging something for the first time to themselves, they're doing it in my presence and I'm bearing witness to that. So it's almost like, you know, two birds with one stone. Not that that's what they're thinking of, but in that moment, they've allowed themselves that vulnerability to say, yeah, this is, I own this. And that's
Exactly.
amazing.
Yeah, so I think you just listed a couple more benefits, right?
Oh,
Improving self-esteem, improving self-confidence.
yes. Yeah.
And maybe along with that, but slightly different, is that word I used earlier, empowerment, right?
Yes.
I I think that there is something so empowering about just owning our truth.
Yes.
And, and if you think about it, also getting back to this idea of control, I think the more empowered we are, the more we are able to, facilitate the changes that we would like to see in our lives.
Hmm. And I think that brings up a good point too, where if we're feeling empowered, if we have boosted our self-confidence, if we're boosting our self-esteem, I think when stressful, difficult situations happen, we then and I'm not saying that, okay, it doesn't mean it's stressful, but I think we're
Mhm.
better able to navigate those situations because we have this sense of, okay, I can do this. I've got this, or it's going to be okay. Even if this is going to be tough, this is going to be rocky, you're much more willing to do it as opposed to that shrinking away and going, "Oh, no, no, no. I'm
Yeah,
avoiding this."
absolutely. Were there any other benefits that you wanted to mention before we kind of transition into strategies?
Um, no, but I will say, and I just wanted to bring this up because you and I were talking prior to this recording. You had asked, you're curious why I was so interested in this subject.
Yes.
And part of it is because of the benefits, that it brings. And I can tell you that this is something I see all the time in my practice. I can't tell you it is woven somehow into session, even if it's validating someone who has kind of taken accountability and just saying, you're doing the right thing, just having that voice. But and it's very interesting. I this is accountability is kind of a pet peeve for me. Um,
Mm.
in the sense of because I do value it. And I have so much respect when people just they own their stuff, when they say, "Yeah, I screwed up," or, you know, "I I did this and I'm proud of it, and I'm not ashamed to say that." And it's, again, it comes back, like, to authenticity. I mean, so I think of almost every episode that we've done really ties into this. And,
Yes.
we were talking earlier about the idea of starting with yourself. And if we tie that back to the episode on perfectionism, I think part of why this episode is so important to me is that in that struggle with perfectionism, it's really hard if you can't be honest with yourself or acknowledge that, okay, yeah, this is a problem, or I didn't do a great job with this. Um, it's really hard. And so if
Mhm.
I'm going to say, wow, I'm not a perfect person, or if I can't accept that, how am I supposed to be authentic with someone else? How if I can't accept that I screwed up, how are they going to accept that I screwed up? And
Exactly.
it's the little things too. I think this part I think comes with age, but I don't know when I was younger that I valued this concept as much as I do now. And
Mhm.
I think now, and part of it could be the fact that, life has taught, I think most of us, that life is short. And I know I want to make the most of whatever time I have here, whether that's my relationships with people, my
Mhm.
experiences.
Mhm.
And so if someone is going to be this is the personal side of it. If someone is going to be in my life, I want them to take the best care of themselves that they can because
Mhm.
I want them around. I I want to experience things with them. I want to grow old with them. I want to laugh with them. I want to be there with them when, things are really difficult. And so for me, that's why this is so important to me personally. Because this is a big part in life. And if we are accountable, life is so much easier. It's hard in the moment, but overall you
Mhm.
can breathe.
Yes. Exactly. Exactly. So it might feel uncomfortable, awkward, whatever in the moment when we have to take accountability. But I 100% agree that if you practice this, and again, it is a practice, right? Like
Yes.
I am certainly not saying, and I'm assuming you're also, well, I won't speak for you, but am I perfect at taking accountability 100% of the time? No.
Right.
I think I've gotten pretty darn good at it.
Mhm.
But it's a practice, and there is a sense of relief that comes with just and again, that this is a strategy, I guess, these start to blend together, but like acknowledging mistakes. I know we've talked about that one before, but I think
Yep.
people have such an aversion to really just owning mistakes when, let's face it, if you're a human being on this planet, you are making mistakes.
Right.
And imagine if we could just start to feel more and more okay with acknowledging our mistakes. And then you know what happens? It's kind of like magic, but then suddenly if someone we love makes a mistake, we might not get feel as angry. or
Exactly.
whatever it is, or hurt or upset, whatever, if the mistake somehow is impacting us.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Do you wanna jump into strategies?
I would love to. And I guess that is, acknowledging mistakes we can certainly put on that. Well, I have it on my list
Yep.
of strategies. And I don't think there's one perfect way to do this, right? But maybe like if you're someone who really has a hard time with acknowledging mistakes, maybe you just start really small. Like if you make a mistake, you don't need to go, by the way, I'm not suggesting you get a megaphone and go blast it around your house, right? Or out in the street, but maybe you sit with yourself and you get a journal and a pen and paper and you just you start to acknowledge it within yourself like shit, I did this thing. I really regret it. Um these are the feelings that are coming up for me. This is why I think this is, these are the circumstances that maybe led me to this mistake. And you just start reflecting within yourself.
Mhm.
Um, so that is one thing that I think could be very beneficial.
That's a great idea, and to kind of piggyback on that, because, I mean, you mentioned, like, the journaling aspect and writing it down. I also think, because you mentioned, like, writing down your feelings and what's coming up, I think it's important to also look, because you mentioned the process, okay, what's my progress? Over time, even if you're chunking it down to, okay, last at 10 o'clock this morning, I felt this way, but by 11 o'clock, I felt this way.
Mm. Yep.
And,
Yep.
you know, looking at, okay, did I feel better? Did I feel worse? What contributed to that? Because I think it's important to see the progress. And again, it's part of that giving yourself kudos when you're doing a good job. I think one of the things that's important, and we can kind of break this down. I think this will cover a couple of different things, but what language are you using with yourself and what language are you using with others? So I think one of the important things is, and I think you brought this up earlier, which is blaming. So stop blaming other people. And one of the
Mhm.
things that I hear a lot, and I think this is about, it can be about control too, but I will hear someone say, they made me feel this way. And had they not done
Yep.
this, so it's their fault.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I will go back a lot and reframe that and say, okay, well, how are you feeling? Let's not worry about
Mhm.
external. Let's go internal and let's change the language around that. So I feel X, or I experienced X when you said this. And
Yes.
I see this a lot too with, again, external factors that aren't within your control. So I mean, I don't know if this is a realistic expectation, I mean, example rather. Um, but like, you mentioned the rain.
Mhm.
Okay. So you could blame the weather and be like,
Mhm.
this is a bad
Yep.
day because I haven't seen the sun in 5 days." Sure, you could blame the rain, but you're not going to change that. And what I'm hearing is that you're upset because you need sun. The sun rejuvenates you. So you have a choice. You can take action. What are you going to do?
Exactly.
And I think that's part of, and even if we've talked about this before, that internal dialogue, are you beating yourself up?
Mhm.
Say if I had a conflict with you and I'm like, I'm going to bring it up to her. I'm going to bring it up to her. And then I don't. And then am I beating myself up and saying, well, again, maybe the blame, she didn't give me an opportunity. She didn't let me
Mm.
say what I needed to say.
Right. Right.
Okay, well, I'm mad at myself because I didn't say, hey, Megan, I need to talk to you. So, and now I've put myself in a hole because I'm like, you're an idiot, blah, 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 blah. Again, let's change that dialogue.
Yeah. Such a good example. I really do think that oftentimes when we're angry at other people or other situations, other circumstances, if we're really serious about putting time and effort into this process of self-inquiry, it's amazing how many times you might come to the conclusion that, "Oh, I'm actually angry with myself," or whatever the feeling might be, right?
Yes, right. Or even angry with things you have no control over.
Yes. Yes, exactly, and the good news about that is that if it's coming back to me, oh, well, I can change my I can change how I feel about something. I can't change how you feel about something. I can't change the rain, right? Like, um, and so it's I guess that gets back I guess I'm using the word empowerment a lot today. That's so incredibly empowering.
Yes, yes. And part of I think you bring up and I mean, I don't know if this popped up for you, but as I was listening to you, part of what I'm thinking about is I think we get ourselves into habits.
Mhm.
And I don't sometimes I think we realize it, but again, oftentimes we don't. And if, as an example, if my habit is to blame or to lash out or to go and hide or avoid or whatever it is, in terms of like the journaling, I think that's important to look at what are my habits? And one, do I want to change any of them? Because if you don't want to,
Mhm.
but then two, okay, if I do, how am I going to do this? Because to your point being a process, this is not gonna happen overnight, and your perspective isn't going to change overnight. It's going to take time, and it's going to, essentially take dedication.
Yes, completely agree. It's hard work, but the benefits are well worth it.
Yes. And, I think we had talked about one of the examples in the perfectionism was to trying to be imperfect on little things that maybe don't matter. And I
Yes.
think
Yes.
this is another place where you could do this. And what's kind of
Mhm.
coming up for me, and this was one of my pet peeves is when people say they're going to do something and then they don't do it. And and this is
Mm.
not I mean personally, professionally, I have so much patience and compassion
Mhm.
and grace for that.
With clients. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. But I think if you have a problem personally following through, start with little things. Again, build that foundation. So if you say, okay, I'm going to text you tomorrow at 12 o'clock. Okay, I'm going to text you. If I have to set 15 reminders to make sure I do it,
Yeah, and
and all I'm going to do
alarms.
is say,
Yep. Yep.
right. It's okay. I'm going to come up with a strategy so that I follow through. I think is equally important. And I have gotten a lot better at this, where if you said to me, "Oh, do you wanna go do X?" "Sure, yeah, let's go do that." And then I go, "Oh my god, I can't do that on that day.
Mhm.
I have,
Mhm.
8 clients, I've gotta go to the dog groomer," and we tend to overbook. So, I think it's also important to
Mhm.
say, "Okay, no, I can't do that. I would love to, let's pick a different time."
Right.
So, if you can't follow through,
So knowing your boundaries. Yeah.
yes, yes. And I think that's a big part of it is, if I said to you, "All right, Megan, we're gonna meet for dinner tomorrow at 6," and then at 5:30, I go, "Oh my gosh, like, I'm just so tired, I can't do it." Knowing you, you're
Mhm.
gonna be gracious about that,
Mhm.
but I'm also gonna
Mhm.
feel like
Mhm.
crap because I'm gonna say, "Sarah, you didn't plan well," and, barring an emergency or whatnot, but you knew you guys have had this planned for 2 weeks, and you couldn't get your shit together enough
Mhm.
to manage your day so that you could show up on time and be present. So, my thinking
So,
is
can I
oh, go
ask
ahead.
sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
Well, I was okay, so just to let's just go with that for a moment. because I think you're bringing up a really good thing that, at least for me, when I'm talking about taking accountability, it's a slippery slope then to start to beat yourself up. So, in that
Yeah.
hypothetical scenario, right? If we made plans and then the day comes and you break them off with me, what I just heard you say is that you're going to be like really really mad at yourself. Um
Mhm.
but is there a way to take accountability without beating ourselves up about it? And that's kind of an
Yes.
open-ended question, right? Like maybe that's a whole topic for another day, but that's what was just coming up for me when you were talking about
Mhm.
this hypothetical.
No, you bring up, I think,
Like,
2 really good strategies that would
mhm,
kind of counteract that, and I'm also
okay,
thinking, like,
yep,
that response for me personally would be, like, worst case, right? So, okay, if I'm
mhm,
beating myself up, I've got two options. This is what comes up for me. I can practice for self-forgiveness. I can, again, goes back to that perfectionism, you know, okay, things went awry, or you didn't plan for this, or this happened. You're doing the best you can. You're okay. Cut yourself some slack. Um, and if I have to make amends as part of that to you, I'm willing to do that
mhm,
because that is
yep,
part of me owning this is what happened, but not beating myself
right,
up. I think the other
yes,
part, and this goes back to I think 2 episodes ago, is using self-compassion, right? It's
mhm,
what were the strategies and what
mhm,
were the ideas that we
yep,
talked about in that episode that we learned that, okay, how do I apply that to myself? Because we're only human and things happen and it's not the end of the world. And, do you want to be that person who is okay with making mistakes and saying, "Yep, maybe this was my mistake. Maybe this wasn't. Maybe this was the universe. Everything came together that said,
mhm,
you cannot go, and that's okay."
mhm,
But
mhm.
it is that I think that self-compassion piece.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, that was beautifully said, and it's just everything's about balance, right? It's yes, we fully both agree in the benefits of taking accountability, but we're not suggesting taking accountability means you beat yourself up for every single thing you do, and then you just stay in that place, right?
Right.
That's not
Right.
what yeah.
And I think that was a good catch on your part because I do think it's easy for I think we might have talked about this before. I know I say this a lot in sessions in that for some reason, as human beings, it's easy for us to go towards the negative. It's easy
Mhm.
for us to, whether it's beating ourselves up or just having that kind of
Yep.
pessimistic attitude, and I think I'm glad you caught that.
Mm. Good. Yeah. Yeah, and it also and I'm glad it came up too, only because it's such a human response, right? It's we
Yes.
all do that. That very well could have been me
Yes.
that was just starting to say, "Oh," and then go down that road of, "Oh, I feel so bad. blah, blah, blah."
Right. I didn't know if there were other strategies that you had that we haven't covered.
Well, one other one I'll mention, and I know we've talked about this before as well, but, the idea of even if it's only for 5 minutes a day, practicing mindfulness, and I know mindfulness is just such a kind of catch-all, it can even be a little cliche. Um, but when I'm talking to clients or others about a practice of mindfulness, really all I mean is that let's just say it's for 5 minutes a day. You are sitting with what whatever is coming up for you in the moment without distractions. So you're not looking at your phone, you're not talking to other people. I know for me, like one thing that I do every morning without fail, well, I don't do this in the winter, but I will open the window and I listen to the birds and I just sit with the sound of the birds in the background. And then I just allow myself to feel whatever is coming up for me. So, a perfect example is this morning. So, yesterday was Mother's Day, and I had family over, and it was wonderful. Um, but I really felt groggy this morning, and I think it was
Mm,
just from whatever maybe I ate stuff I don't usually eat. Maybe I didn't drink enough water. Maybe I spent a little too much time just preparing, whatever, right? Nothing drastic, but I'm so keenly aware of how I feel physically, mentally, emotionally that I was able to sit this morning and immediately, right, like, oh, I'm feeling this way because of this. All right.
mhm.
Is there anything I wanna tweak right now? Do I wanna go get another glass of water? I mean, I know these things sound really simple, but I'm telling you, they can make a huge difference. And so, to
Yes.
me, mindfulness is honestly just sitting with what is. Yeah.
Mhm. I like that, and I do think that's important, and what I like about, like you said, even the 5 minutes is that it's a kind of a pause. It's a pause in your day. If you start the day that way, you're starting on this,
Mhm.
it's I think it's a grounding note. If you decided in the middle of the day, "Okay, now's my opportunity to take my 5 minutes," I think, that kind of thing also
Yeah.
slows our central nervous system down, and it's important.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I think to practice this mindfulness can also be, I mean, you can do it at any point. But for me, I also find it very helpful at the very end of the evening when just prior to sleep.
Mm,
And you can again kind of just sit in this place of silence and see what comes up for you. Maybe there's something that happened in the day that really bothered you, but because your day was so busy, you just put it aside.
mhm,
Right? And so maybe something will bubble up that, "Oh, yeah, I really wanna go back to that tomorrow. I want to address that with this person," or whatever it is. Um, but I find that upon, just, waking up and right prior to sleep, those can be 2 really good times to practice the mindfulness and the self-inquiry.
great, thank you. I think that's important. I like having the kind of bookends, if you will.
Absolutely.
So, one last thing I want to throw out there, and I will make sure I put this in the show notes, but for those of you listeners that want to take this further and read more, there's a few good books, and these are very different people, but one person that you always hear us talking about is Brene Brown. And her book, Daring Greatly: How the Courage to be Vulnerable Transforms the Way We Live, Love, Parent, and Lead. So that is one I would throw out there. And another one, and I think we had talked briefly about, sometimes we'll get into bad habits. James Clear, he has a book called Atomic Habits: An Easy and Proven Way to Build Good Habits and Break Bad Ones. And then the last one I would throw out there, and this is about making excuses or blaming. It's called Crush Your Excuses: The Power of Personal Accountability, a self discipline book on how to hold yourself accountable at work and in life, discipline your mind, and overcome victim mentality. And that's by Maxwell Willow. So I will make sure that I throw those into the notes, but those
Mhm.
might be worth checking out if people want to. Um, before we wrap this up, Megan, is there anything else you wanna add?
One last thing, and this is just another resource that I will
Mhm.
add to the mix. Um, I think this is one of the really neat things about the two of us is we might have different, resources to offer because the person I'm going to mention right now might be different than some of the ones you just mentioned. But I do want to bring her up. So there is a spiritual teacher and author. Her name is Byron Katie, and she wrote a book that I had read honestly decades ago. But I loved it, and it's called "Loving What Is: Four
Mm,
Questions That Can Change Your Life." And she has a website we'll also list in the show notes that is chock full of free downloadable resources. But really, what she the crux of her work is around this idea of self inquiry and leading you through questions to really ask yourself when you're feeling, a strong emotion, again, typically about someone else or yourself or a situation. And I have found her incredibly helpful just in my own journey of this process of accountability. So we'll make sure that if that sounds interesting to anybody, we'll make sure that we list her as well.
yes, definitely. Sounds interesting to me. I might have to
Mhm.
get that book.
Check it out.
Alrighty. So as always, if you like what you're hearing, subscribe. Please share with your friends. If there's anything you want us to, if you have suggestions for topics or feedback, either comment where you get your podcast under the episode, or feel free to email us at therapyunplugged at proton mail. No, that's not our email. I can never do this email.
That's
There,
hard, Sarah. That's why I don't say it.
oh my goodness. Therapy Unplugged podcast at proton.me. And if I have messed that up, I will fix that in the show notes too.
Sounds right.
So please stay tuned. Next time, we're going to be talking about the role of productivity in our lives. So, everyone, thanks for tuning in and have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
If you want to share your thoughts or ideas with us, you can email us at therapyunpluggedpodcast at proton.me. Until next time, be sure to subscribe to Therapy Unplugged on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere you get your podcasts.